And are we recording? Yeah, I guess we are. This is the meeting for PED on April 12th, and we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Start with the approval of the minutes. Did you both have a chance to look at them?
I have no changes.
No changes.
Okay, great. I don't either, so minutes are approved. And we'll start with the first item, which is development review update. Jason, I guess.
I'm actually going to go and throw it over to Laura, and Laura's going to get it started. So if Laura's ready to go, we'll let her go.
Okay, great.
Good morning, Chair Bergan, council members. Laura Perry, Deputy City Manager. Presentation. I am muted. Okay, there we go. Good morning. We're here to give the development review quarterly update for the first quarter of the year. A couple of things we're going to cover today. We're going to talk a little bit about our culture of performance and predictability, a continuous experience survey that we're going to be administering, give an update on our workload and metrics, and talk a bit about the performance of the development review fund for the first quarter. So as a reminder, our mission statement across the organization is to deliver quality, on time, and customer-focused services with an emphasis on livability, job creation, economic growth, and responsible planning, engineering, and construction. To fulfill this mission, we are focused on enhancing predictability and consistency in our development review process across the city. And in order to achieve this, departments have been focused on building a culture of performance and predictability, which are really focused on four major areas: management, leadership oversight, culture and customer service, process improvement and technology, and process documentation, teaching, and training. Within these four areas, we have defined opportunities to streamline processes, realign our organization, and provide better customer service to our customers. And of course, all focus areas are based on continuous customer feedback as our foundation. You will continue to hear about all of the four identified areas of improvement and our progress throughout the year. And of course, our overarching goal is to get projects to approval while meeting city code and regulations. So quickly, to provide a few highlights of the initiatives we've accomplished. You've heard about many of these in past presentations, so I'm just going to give a few highlights. We continue to meet on our staff leadership for the Development Review Governance Committee across the city, which helps oversee the various process improvements and efforts that we are implementing. We have an expedited review process. We're continuing to meet in person. Our ODA has pre-application meetings that are either in person or hybrid, and right now our current lead time on those is approximately 3 weeks out. And with the summer season quickly approaching, we continue to monitor staff levels and augment staff where needed with third-party inspections to help with workload. Beginning June of last year, the TCO extension fee is no longer administered for single-family permits. And then you've heard a lot about our Public Works reorganization and the creation of a new development review division in the department. The reorganization is complete, with the last step being the consolidation of intake for civil plans in the permit center. This will be a one-stop shop for civil, real property, and building plan submittals, which will institute a standard work process for quality checks of plans and provide overall consistency for plan intake. Our goal, of course, is to continue to partner with the development community to ensure we are receiving quality submittals and providing timely feedback We're continuing to implement digital Mylar recordings, a large development review or large project development review process. And then several departments are in the process and collaborating on updating the roadway manual, UDO, and drainage manual. We will be updating the Parks, Recreation, Open Space, Dedication, and Design Criteria Manual later this summer. And planning has hired a consultant to review the development application process. So all of that is in process. The development community is and will continue to be engaged on all manuals. Technical difficulty.
Laura, when are I can't read that. When are the manuals done?
They're done at various times throughout this year.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, that better? Oh. I am obviously complete challenge in a hybrid environment. So apologies for that.
Yeah.
All right. And then I mentioned, of course, also we're continuing to monitoring staffing for plan review, workload, and augmenting staff through third-party contractors where needed. Continuing on with initiatives and process, license agreement updates, we're actively meeting with the development community on the process license agreements. We are moving towards a subdivision plat dedication language process. It will streamline the process, save the development community time, and we are actively engaged with them in reviewing language and hoping to bring that to completion in the second quarter of this year. We're working on building a culture of performance throughout the organization. I'll talk about that in a couple of slides, as well as instituting a customer service survey. I will also touch on that. And then last, in the prior slide, I talked about consolidated intake. Part of that is also providing the development community better checklists and better guidance in terms of what we're looking for submittals, for quality control. And that way we are ensuring consistency in those submittals through our new consolidated intake process. Future plan initiatives include plan review comments and tracking, so a consistent way to track these across various departments and divisions. Fee payment timing, so there's various points in time throughout the development review process that the development community pays fees. So we're hoping to take a look at that and streamline that to save time and also look at our systems to ensure that no plan reviews are being held for payment, that we're continuing to move. We have a timeline that's published in our development handbook that's posted online that we follow and track against. That timeline's about 20 years old. So eventually we'd like to evaluate the timeline in collaboration with the development community to ensure that we're building consistency and we're working with them on better timelines for those complex projects. And then last, the middle requirements, I touched on this a couple times, ensuring that we are updating our submittal requirements to align with development milestones for various aspects of the development review process. To help us get there and be successful, we have constituted an advisory board to city management to garner customer feedback in a consistent and organized manner for development review process improvements, new policies, and requirements. So the various items that I just mentioned in the previous slides will be reviewed and discussed with the Development Advisory Board. This group meets bi-monthly in person with city staff, and they had their first meeting last month. Their next meeting, in February. Their next meeting is at the end of this month. And you'll see here that the board consists of, various developers across the community, as well as design and engineering professionals. Beginning in March, we're planning to roll out a new customer experience survey. And this will ensure that our improvements to the development review process meet our customers' needs. That's first and foremost. This will result in the continuous collection of feedback, both positive and negative. And the results of the survey will be shared and discussed with staff in the various departments at least quarterly. And this will support a continuous culture of continuous improvement in the organization. We continue to receive positive feedback from our customers. I do want to highlight one that we just received last week for the building division. And this was from a member of the construction team for the new faculty club hotel on the Fitzsimmons campus. And the individual said this was one of the most challenging projects. We navigated all of it. And I can say with absolute certainty, this would not have been possible without the guidance, technical proficiency, and customer-friendly service provided by the Aurora Building Department. So we are hoping to, again, receive comments, both positive and negative, reward staff for the positive comments in our efforts to build that culture of continuous improvement in the city. In March, city management established a quarterly multi-departmental in-person all-staff meeting. This was the first meeting that we've held for anyone that touches the development review process in the city. And the goals of this meeting are to really build a one-team mentality across all departments for development review. So in this meeting, staff are discussing key cross-departmental matters. We're providing training. In fact, the next meeting in June, we're going to offer a life in the day of a developer training, and we're going to pull in several developers in the development community to have staff walk a day in their shoes, to build that common understanding of what their stressors are, what their milestones are. And so that's just a flavor of the type of training that this group will receive. We're also helping with the staff meeting to enhance consistent approaches across the development review process, have that conversation in these meetings. And of course, first and foremost, a high priority for the city is ensure that we're providing high quality customer focused service. The progress made as a result of all of the efforts you heard me talk about in the previous slides are beginning to show in our monthly metrics. Overall, workload for plan reviews remain consistent. All departments have notably, as you'll see represented here, increased their on-time percentages since the beginning of the year. And we are seeing year-over-year increases in meeting on-time reviews. So if you take a look at the year-to-date 2022 column compared to the bolded year-to-date 2023 column, you will see the majority of departments seeing increases in on-time review metrics. Most outstanding is the increase in on-time civil plan reviews and the continued perfect performance on issuing building permits and conducting building code inspections on time. The building division continues to be the gold standard for the city. Departments are consistently reviewing this data on a monthly basis, analyzing areas of improvement and identifying solutions to address the areas of improvement. The review of workload and performance metrics for the development review process has become a strong part of the culture of the organization. And as mentioned earlier, our goal is to get everyone to the finish line on their projects as fast as possible. A little bit about the performance of the Development Review Fund. So as a reminder, the Development Review Fund was created in 2002 to address developer demand for a consistent and predictable approval process for development, land planning, engineering, and building permits. The revenues originate from development-related fees for various plan reviews, permits, and inspections. Reviews that exceed plan expenditures remain in the Development Review Fund and create a reserve to help support times of volatility if there's a downturn or we see revenues and expenditures fluctuate. Revenues and expenditures do fluctuate over time depending on the level of new development and construction activity within the city and the resulting changes in plan review and inspection activity. Early projections for 2023 for revenue are on trend to the adopted budget. And those had assumed a planned downturn of about a loss of 10% in 2023 versus 2022 for revenue. We're continuing to monitor workload, as I mentioned earlier, and the costs for the active management of workload and bringing on those third-party contractors are paid from the development review fund, and you'll see that represented in the supplies and contracted services line. So that concludes the update. Lastly, I would really like to thank staff in planning, pros, Public Works, Aurora Water, and ODA. The accomplishments, the progress that you heard on throughout the presentation would not be possible without many staff and their dedication to improving our processes and performance. There's a lot of conversation on this daily throughout the organization. There's a lot of excitement about innovative solutions, implementing ideas. We still have work to do, and we're confident that we continue to move Aurora in the direction of having the best development review process in the region. And with that, we'll open it up for questions.
Questions, Councilmember Lawson or Sundberg?
Councilmember Bergan. Yes, thank you, Laura. Great information. I was curious about the advisory board made up of developers. How long has that been in place or conceptualized?
So that we began planning for that in January of this year. They had their first meeting in February and are meeting on a bi-monthly cadence.
Great. Seems like a good idea to really garner some direct feedback and support. I noticed a couple tough customers on there, and I'm sure they're very direct with you about what they'd like to see. So I think that's a great idea.
Yes, I will share. It's been a very productive conversation with them. They're having meetings after the meetings. We're engaging with them outside of the standard formal meetings. So lots of conversation, and we feel it'll be a very productive and beneficial effort as we implement our various improvement efforts in the city.
Good. Thank you.
Councilmember Bergan, I have a couple questions.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, Laura. Thank you so much for the presentation. I just have a couple questions. So regarding the customer service experience survey, how many times are you guys going to do that? As you know, as we're growing and development changes, different things can add into an equation that can actually impact some of these development reviews. You guys have definitely have improved, and it's fantastic. But I just wanted to know how many customer surveys do you plan to maybe do, like in a fiscal year or within a year, or is it just once every year? And then just a question on that.
Good question. This is a continuous survey.
Okay.
So we're going to be adding the survey to signature links in plan reviewers' emails. It is going to be on the communications that planning sends out with their letters. So this is not a one and done. This is continuous. So that, to your point, we are catching and monitoring any changes that are occurring in the development community and can respond to that and also build trends over time. So continuous, think of this like you go and you visit a doctor's office, and then they send you how was your experience survey after your visit. This is exactly like that. We want to know throughout the various stages of the development review process, how our customers are feeling and how we can position ourselves to best respond to any areas of improvement.
Okay. And then Councilmember Bergan, I just have another question.
Go ahead.
My other question is, as I know that in the, the day that you have like the life and the day of a developer and those kind of sessions, I just want to make sure, and hopefully, I know we have kind of our developers that have been in Aurora for a long time, but I'm hoping that we're capturing new people who are coming into the development community in Aurora. And I just wanted to make sure, will that be happening as well on these type of things, invitations to those individuals as well?
Yes, our goal is to engage every aspect of the development review committee, not limit it to, a few.
Okay.
So yes, we are actively monitoring that, and we'll be extending invitations, broadly.
Okay. And then my last question is, great on the percentages on everything that has increased. Just a little curiosity, and it's still great. I was just kind of being maybe I'm nitpicking, not really. But why is underneath the development application it's still like at a 73% compared to all of the other what's kind of going on with that measure compared to some of the other percentages that have really significantly went up? And this one has too, but I just noticed that that one was a little bit lower than maybe some of the others.
Yes, great question. So I think it's important to note for each of the categories in parts of the process, there are multiple departments that are involved in every process. That's why you don't see department names tied to each of the various steps of the process. So for the development applications themselves, I can let Janine speak to it as well, but traffic reviews are a big part of that. Their workload's very high. And over the last several months, Public Works has been evaluating that workload, the number of pages that the traffic plans are that they have to review, and have identified solutions on the staffing side to help work with that, to help address that workload issue and timing. So we're hopeful that we have a couple of vacancies that we need to fill, but once those are filled, we're hopeful that we'll see those numbers increase. Janine, anything to add?
Yeah, and one thing we're doing is with Steve on board now is making sure that we have clear communication between our departments and that we are communicating any delays and additional information that's needed, because sometimes that's honestly where we're stuck, is needing more information from the applicants, but making sure we have that feedback loop, and where necessary, instead of the planning case manager being the interpreter, facilitating the direct conversation between the engineers and the developers consultants so that there's no surprises.
Okay, thank you for addressing my questions. I appreciate it.
And then I have a couple. So you said we have a couple vacancies, and that is in the traffic department?
We have more than just traffic.
It's in every, we have vacancies in every department, yes.
Well, yeah, but traffic reviews, the volume is really high, you said. So I just,
Yes.
do we have an actual open position or two?
We have 2 open positions, but we are also augmenting with third-party services for traffic reviews.
Okay, okay. I know I've asked this in the past. Have we considered using interns in the summertime?
Yes, for the purposes of the reviews, I believe it has to be done by a certified engineer.
Yeah, it would be hard, I think, to find the qualifications in a kind of a temporary basis. So it's a pretty high skill kind of position we're looking for. Really
But
not permanent.
would interns be able to do, maybe offload some of the other work for those engineers?
Probably not. The other work that some of the engineers who are doing development review are also doing things like timing our traffic signals, just making determination about where stop signs go, all the different kind of traffic operations duties that are within a traffic engineering group are also being done by the same staff that are doing development review. So it's still like kind of a high skill set group of people.
Okay, well, it might be good just to have them in there for training so that you can hire them once they get their degree.
Yeah, absolutely. Great suggestion.
Okay, and then on the advisory board, how was the board selected? Because I know, for example, Norris Design is not in there, and they actually do a lot of work in the city and a variety of different types of applications or development plans, I mean.
Yeah, we simply took, through ODA, looked at several of, the various aspects of types of development in the city, the engineers, the designers that we routinely work with, but are certainly open if there's others that we need to be engaging. We welcome that suggestion.
Yeah, you might want to talk to Norris Design just because they do so much work in the city. They might have good input, across the board in that regard. And then that leads me to my last one, which is kind of, related to what we have coming up with some of the resolutions and ordinances. Do we let developers know, I don't know if it's through the joint task force or through this advisory board, but do we let them know, hey, there's going to be an ordinance on prairie dogs, or there's going to be an ordinance on the notifications and so forth, so that they have input before we actually have our meetings, our policy meetings?
So the joint task force is the source where we typically have been sharing that information. Jacob, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Hey, Laura. So yes, Councilmember Bergan, that's absolutely how we approach it. So in terms of the advisory board, that's kind of a focus group where we want to garner that more specific feedback. And then we still have the joint task force, and we kind of time those meetings in terms of talking to the advisory group, which is that smaller group, a little more focused on something like a legislative item like that. And then we would roll it out to the joint task force, in addition to city policy initiatives that we're working on.
Okay, so have they seen the ones that are on today's agenda?
No, they've not. So that would be something that we would likely talk about at the next meetings.
Okay, and the reason it concerns me is because I'm running around trying to get feedback on my own, like what are your thoughts on this and what are your thoughts on that one? I don't have the time to go run down all the developers and try to get their perspective, because I just want to make sure when, especially when we're passing ordinances that are law, that we don't pass something that we didn't think all the way through of negative consequences. And so, I'm going to have questions coming up on, one of them. And I wish I would have had the feedback. And, I have a little bit of time, I guess, between now and possibly study session when it comes up. But I think it would be a good practice to try to get that feedback ahead of time for policy committees.
Yeah, understood. Can absolutely do a better job of that.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's, just an email that goes out and says, hey, these are coming up. It doesn't have to be a meeting.
Yeah.
And Councilmember Bergan, I can just, anytime there's something like that you'd like to have that feedback, feel free to just remind us. As you know, often council will do that, particularly on things like the one that comes to mind is Business Advisory Board. Whenever we're doing something that kind of impacts the business community, you all are really good about prompting us to say, hey, did we go to the Business Advisory Board? So I would just, we'll make an internal note for staff, but obviously, please, remind us as well, and we can get that out via email. And depending on the timing of both the item and our meetings, we can always take it to a meeting, but certainly distribute it by email and collect comments that way as well. But great point. So thanks for the reminder.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from our members? Councilmember Lawson and Sundberg. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to 3B, which is the IGA with Prairie Point. And who's presenting? Steve?
Yes, my item, Steve Durian. I'm the Deputy Public Works Director for Development Review. Give me a moment to share my screen. I'm going to put up an exhibit from the agreement that I think will help to illustrate what we're trying to achieve here. Go. Give you a better view here. Okay, while I'm setting this up, let me give you a little background. What we're trying to do here is to create a seamless process of moving the responsibilities of an easement through the development review process from the developer, which in this case, this is the Prairie Point development. So this is basically Aurora Parkway between roughly E470 and Parker Road. It's the Prairie Point development being developed by Clayton Properties Group as developer. Properly so you can see it better. And so so basically what is happening is they're building infrastructure that's going to be dedicated to the city. That includes roads and utility infrastructure. Some of this infrastructure will struggle a little bit. Some of this infrastructure will be crossing an easement that's owned by Magellan and has a gas main running through the easement. Well, I'm just having trouble with this display here.
Control and scroll. Zoom.
There we go. That's what I tried to do. So I'm going to point out where this easement is. As you can see, it crosses in two locations. are public roadways that will be built by the developer. And in 3 locations, it'll cross an easement that will have Aurora Water Utilities within it. So this, what we'd like to do is to try to achieve a seamless.
Did we lose you?
Looks like the Aurora room is having some issues there this morning.
We've lost him, right? I can't hear him.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can.
Oh, good. All right. Let me take a step back. What we're trying to do is to have a seamless transfer of public infrastructure from the developer to the city, and also acknowledge the fact that there's a Magellan control of this easement and a utility that Magellan maintains within this easement. So there's a series of 3 agreements that are in the works here. One is an encroachment agreement between Magellan and the developer, where the construction of the improvements by the developer will be formalized. And that will then be transferred to the Community Advisory Board, or the CAB. This agreement that we're talking about today is an IGA between the city and the CAB for an interim condition while the road is being constructed and maintained within the warranty period by the developer. And until an agreement, that'll be the 3rd agreement, but it'll be between the city and Magellan. And really the question is, should that Magellan infrastructure need to be maintained within the areas that are controlled by the city or by Aurora Water? How will that maintenance occur, and who will be responsible for some of the work that would have to be done should Magellan have to come in and do some of this maintenance? So this agreement really just creates that seamless condition in the interim, and it will require a resolution of City Council to approve the IGA with the developer. I should say we also have representatives of the developer on this call, and they can answer questions, as can I. So I'll open it up to any questions you might have.
Great, thank you. Questions from Councilmember Lawson or Sundberg? No.
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. I know this was a really complicated process to get to this point in terms of all the parties, especially with Magellan. I know we sometimes come across this with other developers as well when there's an easement for a gas line. So I appreciate all the work that went into it between the developer and our staff in getting this done. I believe it was really important that we had this agreement so that the work can progress in terms of getting that road done, and any delays in that, especially during good weather, just further delays development. So if Dave Carroll, I don't know if you're on, if you want to add anything.
No, I think Steve, you did a great summary, and I just want to echo what you said, that we appreciate the city's cooperation and team effort to kind of resolve this complicated issue.
Okay.
And I think I think this is a great solution. And we're open for any other questions, but I just want to say thank you to all the staff, and yourself and Steve and others, getting through this. It was a lot of meetings, a lot of discussion, but I think we arrived at a solution that is equitable for everyone.
Great, thank you. Any further comments, questions? Okay, we'll go ahead and move this forward then to the study session. Is that the next step?
That's correct. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And we'll, excuse me, got frog in my throat. We'll move on to the next one, which is the HOA notification process, which is mine. So I'll just go ahead and start. And basically, this has come up over the years, and it really came to light, I think, when I had the Addison development public hearing, and there were a couple issues with particular associations that didn't get notified, and then, come to find out they weren't, one of them was not registered. And then, of course, the onus is on the associations that are registered and get notified to then notify their residents. And sometimes there's, that doesn't go very well. So this is just really to express that we would like, excuse me, to make sure that we have two contacts if at all possible. And the reason is sometimes we have one contact for that association, and then if that person's on vacation or, something else, emergency, then possibly the residents would not get notified. So we just thought it would be a good idea to have staff try to get 2 points of contact. And then it also just talks about finding an improved notification process. And I know staff is going to be working on that notification process. And I think, Janine, you guys are looking to bring that back to us maybe in June to PED.
Probably sometime this summer. We have one new supervisor on board as of Monday, another one mid-May, which will give us some more time and bandwidth to start looking at the UDO. And we've heard from numerous council members that looking at our notice procedures is warranted. We agree. We want to look at some best practices and bring that forward. Several options with the analysis to you this summer.
Okay. Questions from Councilmember Lawson or Sundberg? Okay, very good. So can we go ahead and move that one forward as well? Okay, that one will move forward. And then we're on to 3D, which is the prairie dog relocation ordinance that has come back. It was presented at the last PED meeting, and some changes were made to the ordinance. So do we have Councilmember Marcano or Murillo on the line?
Yes, ma'am. Hello. Good morning, everybody. Sorry, I'm a little under the weather.
Oh no, all of us.
Yeah.
I'm here as well, Councilmember Bergan.
Okay, great. Do you want to kind of give an overview of, since it came to PED last month and there was a lot of discussion, just what were the major changes?
Yeah, thank you, and happy to do that. Yeah, as you recall, this came at the last PED meeting, and you might be surprised to have seen such a quick turnaround, but I can attest to the staffing improvements and process that was possible. So essentially, the last time we came to you all, we really hadn't had a chance to vet this through, the various stakeholders. It was in some ways a bit premature, but we also expressed that we've been trying to get this ordinance through the process and since the end of last year. And so, we've been trying to battle through, staff, working with staff, trying to incorporate their concerns, and then just running up against the holidays and all of that good stuff. But all that to say is that we're here today with a pretty different version than we presented last time. We definitely heard the feedback that y'all shared around concerns interfering with the development process in it, in impact this ordinance potentially impacting that. And so we actually went back to staff, again, wanted to dig into their concerns a little bit more. And we actually met with the city of Parker and their staff and their city council to dig in a little bit more about some model legislation, a similar ordinance that they have been very successful in implementing, and wanted to explore kind of the mechanics, both from a, we get to almost learn from their mistakes in a lot of ways, right? They've had this in the books. They've actually made several revisions since, and we've modeled this legislation based on their most revised version. And I'll say just we'll get into details, but what was very heartening about that process is that they've actually had 6 successful relocation of prairie dogs, working directly with the developers, and really express that they've had a really great relationship also with the activist community, and really being able to act as a liaison between the two parties, right? More of the advocacy groups, and the development community, and it's been a very successful model for them. So I'll tell you that we wouldn't have, I guess, changed the ordinance had we not heard some of your feedback, as well as just the success that other cities have found. So that's the high level what's kind of different, some of the major changes. Um, Councilmember Kano, did you want to maybe go into some of the major changes from the proposed version last time and this time?
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Murillo. So the primary thing I want to highlight is that there is just a 30-day period now for relocation to occur. And that is coupled with triggers where typically work does not begin immediately. So you're able to just take advantage of that kind of natural lull in the process to give nonprofits the chance to basically go out and relocate these prairie dogs humanely. During the conversation we had with Parker, they mentioned that they don't use vacuums over there or anything like that. They trap and relocate the critters that way. It's much more humane, and it has a very high rate of success and reintegrating these critters into a safer location. Um, One of the key things that is the same still is the use of humane extermination. This is something that Parker was they highlighted quite a bit during our conversation, because it's not something that just impacts prairie dogs, but it also impacts youth, pets, other wildlife. So the use of humane extermination is something that we felt very strongly needed to stay in here. Yeah, and aside from that, the overall structure basically takes the onus off of the city and the developer and puts it on the organizations that relocate prairie dogs. So, well, obviously, one of our stakeholder groups with this has been Prairie Protection, who you all heard from on Monday, and they're very experienced in doing this. They actually go do a lot of the work down in Parker themselves. So, there's no additional cost to the city or to the developers. And our role as drafted here, or the city's role rather as drafted, would just be to basically make the connection and let everyone figure it out from there. So we empower the community groups, let them do their work, and then the development will continue. And one of the things I do want to note is that the 30 days isn't hard and fast. You have to have prairie dogs on the site for this to even apply, number one. And if the relocation work is done before 30 days, then the project can kick off even quicker. And again, that's not likely to make that big of a difference, because the site work typically doesn't start for a time after that things are approved anywho. But if they are able to get going sooner, then they benefit from that as well. So, and yeah, basically the idea here is to just, safely relocate the wildlife, preserving our keystone species and the habitat that they create for threatened and endangered species in the city. We're going to keep our environment clean for our wildlife and our residents by prohibiting the use of toxins. And these little guys are going to be able to thrive elsewhere without adversely impacting development schedules. So I think it's a win-win-win for everybody involved.
And it does look, I mean, I like it way better than the last draft of the ordinance. A couple of questions, and I know you said they can go ahead and start earlier, but there is that clause in C on the relocation that you cannot relocate them between April 1st and June 1st, because it's the birthing season. So it's the birthing season for the prairie dogs, not just the black-footed ferrets, I guess. What happens if the developer gets approval and is ready to go, April 1st?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The way Parker explained it to us is, they have, a pre-app process just like we do, and that's something that they make sure the development community is well aware of in advance, because they're part of the challenge here is that, if I recall correctly, there's actually statutory guidelines around, protecting our threatened and endangered species. So this is typically a time frame where you may not be able to do site work. generally.
But
So,
the state statute is for the endangered species,
right.
not the prairie dogs, right?
Well, yes and no, because I believe it ties back into the birthing season, since the prairie dogs are the keystone species, meaning that they create the conditions basically for these other critters to come around. So it's a population protection, preservation kind of law, effectively. That's my recollection. So
I get, and I guess my question is, why would we want them to have more? Sounds horrible. To have more babies and then exterminate them. Well, not exterminate them, but relocate them.
relocate.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're good.
I-
Yeah. Go ahead.
So is there not there's no exception on that during that time frame?
No, not as drafted. And again, Parker mentioned that that's never been an issue for them either, because this is something that they make very clear ahead of time through their pre-app process. So, and it's part of how their program has been successful. So,
Okay. And then my second question is on the nonprofit. So are they readily available? So if a developer says, hey, we found prairie dogs on our site and we need to relocate them, I mean, are they available to right away, work with that developer?
yes, the idea is that, we connect the developers with the groups, or really, and it's actually the onus is on the groups first and foremost to actually reach in, but then we can help facilitate that connection. And yeah, basically that's like, okay, there are prairie dogs on this site. You have 30 days. If there's no one available, then there's no one available. If there's not a site available, there's not a site available, and then the other conditions here apply. So.
Okay. And then I think this came up last time that we would have to go through the county commissioners of the county to which they are relocated. And I thought, if my memory serves me right, that Arapahoe County has no sites for relocation. So then we'd have to go to an outside county, and then we would have to have the county commissioners' permission. So I'm just that, if somebody can answer that, because then that would delay it even further if it's anything like our process.
Yeah. Sorry.
Councilmember Bergan. I was wondering if you would entertain a guest speaker from one of the advocacy groups. They can speak to potentially some available lands, and I just wouldn't want to misquote what's available, if that's okay.
Sure.
If I can address the process quickly first, Janine Rustad, Director of Planning and Development Services.
Oh, go ahead, Janine, sorry.
The onus would be on the group to get everything accomplished within that 30 days. That was one of my specific questions to Parker, because I saw the same thing, potential for delay, onus on the city or the developer, but the special interest group has to take care of that, and I'll let them address what they have already available for sites, as we heard on Monday.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, my dog's barking. So who's here?
Deanna, and I can address that.
Right, thank you.
Right now, Pueblo has a pre-approved through their commissioners, a very large, extensive area of land that they are trying to repopulate with prairie dogs. So this potentially is going to start happening in June, and the person in charge of it, Ricky Jones, with the United States Fish and Wildlife Services. And last year, basically, it is approved through the commission. It is approved through the commissioners from Pueblo to have these prairie dogs come in to help the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This also happens at Rocky Flats as well. Sometimes, I don't know if they're taking them this year, but anyway, Pueblo will take, and they've said they'll take any and all prairie dogs that they can get so that they can help fulfill the need to populate 10,000 acres of with prairie dogs on this preserve. So that land right now, that's why we're trying to push for this too, because it's such a great opportunity, and they've said they want to do this many years into the future. So every season that they have that, and it is already approved through Colorado Parks and Wildlife.
Okay, so we would not have to go through the county commissioners through a meeting and then get approval. It would be pre-approved.
Not on this one, yeah. I mean, maybe if this ever closes and but most of the time, like you said, most commissioners do not, unless they're working with Fish and Wildlife, which is often the only place that we've really had success in the past few years anyway. But if it's that case, then the developer, he has to humanely euthanize them if that's the case and they don't have a place because that is true that in other circumstances when they're not working with wildlife officials, it's not very likely that that would happen and that the commissioners would give approval. And one other thing, just on the developers, so in Parker, as soon as a developer files for application to develop, the developer's made aware through the city that if they have prairie dogs on that site, that they need to start working towards this. So we say like 1 month by the time that they have to have this done before they can grade. But initially they'd get a hold of us and a list of people that they're, us, and if Smith Environmental, whoever else is doing it, they'd have that conversation with us. So it gives us more time. That's all I was going to say there, not just the 30 days.
In that 30-day period, that communication can happen earlier.
Yes, yeah, and it usually does, because I think they're notified immediately of the prairie dog ordinance, and they're encouraged to get a hold of people to just start opening that conversation up.
Okay. All right, thank you. Councilmember Lawson or Councilmember Sundberg?
Yes, Councilmember Bergan, I just have a question, just kind of a follow-up in from Janine and Deanna. I just have a question in general. So I know that you stated that it probably wouldn't have to go through the commissioners or anything like that to move the prairie dogs to these different available lands. But is there going to have to be some type of intergovernmental agreement between jurisdictions, maybe from a standpoint, because we are kind of having that collaboration or moving, having that connectivity with another city or another jurisdiction. So is that something that Parker had to do when you're moving these to like different places, or would it just have to, if
They
the
just
land
have
is available, then the land is available and we can just move them?
Yeah, there's a couple steps there, but that's pretty much taken care of once the ball gets rolling. But the governments have to, the only thing with prairie dog relocations, the regulations around that is through Colorado Parks and Wildlife and their relocation permit. So it doesn't have anything to do with the city, as long as the incoming commissioner, so as long as the Pueblo commissioners have already approved that part, then what we would need to wait for is just, CPW to say yes, which last year, sometimes that would take a week and sometimes less, because this was already a thing where the commissioners approved it and they were kind of rushing it so they could help out the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Okay, and then just to follow up to that, you said that it does take, it's rushed and it just depends on that, but there could be with the state sometimes a delay. Has that ever occurred in some of the relocations that you guys have done with other jurisdictions, like with Parker, to move them to other lands? Because that could stall a little bit of a development, because the state sometimes, depending on what's going on, could have something going on, or it could be just some type of, application process that has to go through. Have you ever had that occur where there has been more of a little bit of a delay, which a week is not, but even 2 weeks, but I'm just saying a little bit more of delay?
Well, for so far that's a potential, but like you said, there's 30 days from your ordinance, so that would negate it after the 30 days if the developer had to get graded. But through all the things that we have dealt with in the past few years, when there has been land available, that's never been an issue, because the developers, usually it takes them a lot longer to start grading than what they anticipate in the first place. So what we try to do is make sure the prairie dogs are off the land right before they're going to grade. And to have like whatever, a couple months or whatever, because when we're working with the developers, because they get a hold of us before that 30-day, then there's never been an issue so far. And Parker, I think the officials would confirm that with you as well, that it just hasn't come up as an issue yet, to where they're saying, wait a second, usually developers seem to want to develop at a certain time and we get them out, and then it's much longer before they actually start grading.
Okay, thank you so much for addressing my questions.
Well, thank you so much for asking them.
Councilmember Sundberg?
Yes,
Do you mind if I just add to that really quick, if it's possible?
Well, I just want to get through questions real quick, because I just want to stay on time, and then I'll get back to you.
Okay, I just want to be sure to circle back, Councilmember Lawson, on your question when Councilmember Sundberg asks this.
Thank you. Let's see. I may have missed the answer to this question, but where is Parker relocating the animals?
To Pueblo.
Pueblo. They're going down to Pueblo.
Yes.
And I heard that Pueblo is seeking to repopulate the land. What caused the eradication of the prairie dogs there in the first place?
They had a while ago a plague went through there. I think that was like 5 years or more. And also there weren't ever, I don't believe there's ever a huge population, but what they want to do is reestablish territory so that they can reintroduce the black-footed ferret once they have, I think they want 8,000 acres or more of prairie dog colonies. So that's like their main goal, is to get the ferret out there.
Okay, but there is habitat and tunnels and existing
Oh,
there.
they create all their own burrows for the incoming prairie dogs. So they're doing a lot of artificial, and of course they have a bunch of some prairie dogs and it's starting to build now. But right now, when they're first establishing it, they create artificial burrows for the prairie dogs when they
But
go
the
in there.
ferrets, they'll live within the tunnels created by the prairie dogs?
They will eventually, yeah. And of course, prairie dogs build a lot of tunnels, as you see in their burrows. So once we get them out there and they're manufactured artificial homes, then they immediately start building more and more of their burrows. So they make that more and more possible as they
So in
establish
that
themselves.
area in Pueblo, as in like Ward 2 where I am, I've lived out here since 2003. I've seen populations come and go, and um, so we could conceivably relocate them at great expense and effort down to Pueblo, and they could die from the plague, conceivably, right? I mean, it's
Well, they
plague is a
are
very real
the
issue.
Fish and Wildlife Services is using, and it's not like I said before at the meeting, it's not an enormous expense when you're going through advocates. If you're going through Smith, it's a little bit more, but not anywhere close to 10 times. But they also use they have like peanut butter, certain play, and they are inoculating. They're giving them a vaccine, the prairie dogs, as they release them into the area. They're also dusting the burrows so that the fleas can't live in there. So they use Delta dust. And so Fish and Wildlife is taking many different measures to try to protect those prairie dogs from contracting the plague.
Gotcha. What benefit does the ferret provide to the environment?
It eats the prairie dog.
Well, no, that's not, there's the ferret. Well, for one, the ferret is the most critically endangered mammal in North America. And they're also the predator on the grasslands, and they do provide a lot of different services for the whole biotic community. Same with prairie dogs, but because they're the most critically endangered, they're about to go extinct. In fact, we are breeding them here to try to get them to come back up to their numbers, but they are on the Endangered Species Act, and this is what also incentivizes Fish and Wildlife, because we don't want any species to go extinct. And the ferrets did used to be everywhere because there used to be such large prairie dog colonies. But I can get more information to you about the benefits of ferrets if you'd like through email.
But don't they eat them?
Well, sure, yeah, that's
Yes.
they're 98% dependent on prairie dogs for their food supply, and that's why they're critically endangered, because there aren't as many of them.
Are prairie dogs considered classified as an invasive species?
Prairie dogs?
Yes.
In Colorado, they're considered, which is something we're working on too, but they're considered a nuisance species as well as a keystone species. And they're a nuisance species because they do get in the way of development, and they build, I mean, to me, that doesn't qualify, but from the state. And they, build burrows and create holes in the land, which create a bunch of services for water retention and everything else. But it makes it hard for people to grow crops and grasses. So that's why they're considered, lots of different species are considered nuisances in the state, including coyotes and other ones, which I would disagree with that classification, but they kind of have they're also a species of most concern in Colorado because they do acknowledge that they are down to less than 5% of their population, historic populations. So
And
there's a few different things thrown on prairie dogs, and they are welcomed on larger grasslands, and they are valued for their keystone species status, which means that they support 180 other species. Without the prairie dogs, these other species don't do very well.
And one final question, I believe, is within the stakeholder process, did we involve the development or developer community to seek their input in Aurora?
We talked to Janine Rustad again. We talked to a few developers. This is one we would like to bring through DRAB before a study session. The Development Review Advisory Board.
So we want to seek more of their input, Janine, is that what I heard?
More a broader spectrum of the developers to give them notice of this ordinance.
Okay.
Councilmember Sundberg, do you have any more questions?
I don't think so. Thank you, everyone.
Councilmember Murillo, did you want to follow up on your point?
Yeah, now I got lost in the technical parts of who eats who in the food chain. At the end of the day, let's not talk about how we're involved in that process.
Well, I don't eat very
Okay, so basically, I just wanted to hone in and kind of refocus the conversation. So, yes, there's a lot of more technical stuff than I'm an expert to be able to answer on the food chain and ecosystem. But I think the main point here is the city providing an avenue for folks who care very much about the well-being of our prairie dogs, our advocates, our advocacy community, to engage directly with folks in the development community, and the city being clear on their role in that process, right? It's not to necessarily apply for this permit, right? I think it's a testament to the success that other communities have found working with these advocates, that that these structures and this infrastructure is set up for places for relocation, right? The scope of this ordinance, though, like, doesn't contemplate that kind of outside process at all. It's very much focused on Aurora, giving a 30-day window for that process to be executed. And frankly, what was really great about the conversation with Parker is that we had not only our city attorneys, our staff, their staff, council members on both sides, is that we started that knowledge transfer, right? In that meeting, we, why we don't need to recreate the wheel in terms of like efficiency and being able to learn from their process. They have worked with our staff and committed to continue working with our staff in terms of the implementation. For example, I think Janine had already requested the certification. Like, what is their certification process? Can they just send that over so that we don't have to recreate it, for example? It can be included as part of the checklist in the pre-app meeting. So it's a very transparent process, and we've already started the internal knowledge transfer with staff.
Before we make a decision on this, Janine, we don't need any kind of IGAs or anything. That was kind of mentioned earlier. So that's a question.
My knowledge, know that you just have, as the forget her name, sorry, mentioned that you do have, there's a process through the state, but the onus would be on the property owner getting permission and then the receiving site giving the permission. We're actually taken out of this equation. Dan, correct?
And then would we want to, you mentioned also going to the advisory board just for their input before I mean, this is an ordinance, and I always want to be careful with ordinances because that's law that goes into our, final decisions. And so rather than, if it was a resolution, be a little bit different. But so I do like the idea of just making sure that we are not overlooking something. Oh, I see Sundberg, Councilmember Sundberg has his hand up.
Oh, yes, thank you. I have received a text from a pretty major developer. I just want to share it with you real fast. If they will seek developer input, then I'm not opposed at this point. It'll give us time to figure out if this is something we should oppose, but I'm frustrated that this input was not previously sought by staff or the sponsors prior to reintroduction. So I know developers are not completely opposed, but have some questions here.
Yeah,
just some input.
That was my point earlier, not on this subject, but just earlier in the development review process of, are we letting developers know of upcoming ordinances that will affect them and getting their input? And so to your point, Councilmember Sundberg, I think, and to that developer's point, I think, just one more, try to just get some input from them as a stakeholder, I think would be a good idea. I think, overall, it sounds like it's fine. The onus seems to be on the nonprofit. I guess, just want to, cross our T's and dot our I's.
And I will look to Jacob to see, because the next development review advisory board is next Thursday, if we can get on that agenda.
Okay. So to the sponsors, I mean, I think you'd be probably okay with just getting that one more check from the advisory board, and especially since they're meeting, you said next Thursday, Janine?
Yes.
One final point. I wonder if there's a developer out there that would work with the sponsor here within the next month or so, or even just to try out the process, see how it works with the trapping and relocation and how feasible and easy it is.
Councilmember Bergan.
Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember Maria.
Yeah, Councilmember Sundberg, would you mind sharing the developer that you're directly in contact with? Would be happy to reach out to them before the next meeting. I don't know if it makes sense to implement a law before it's the law. So I don't know if I would necessarily feel comfortable with that recommendation, but if you share the contact that you have, I'd be happy to reach out. Otherwise, I think we've been battling against different timelines, but if we're able to get to the Thursday meeting, I know I certainly would be happy to one more look over. We've already had developer input. Not every developer is part of every conversation, as you know, that's not very feasible, but I do appreciate staff already having proactively gotten that feedback.
I heard we did not have developer input.
I think Janine mentioned that there was.
Janine?
Spoke to a couple developers on the original ordinance. We have not taken back this revised one, working quickly with the Development Review Advisory Board on the 20th, and then the Joint Task Force on the 27th. We could very quickly take it through those two to get a broader input. And I believe that Jacob emails out information so we can get this in the packet and get it to them in advance of these meetings as well.
So is there more than one meeting?
We really need to move on. So I just want to, we've got less than a half hour to finish the rest of the agenda. Personally, my take would be to not move this forward until the advisory board has input. I think that's just makes sense. To just make sure that we have their input. If it might just be totally fine with everybody and there's no concerns and then it can move forward.
Great. I'm comfortable with taking it to DRAB and then bringing it back or bringing it to study after that.
I'm sorry.
I said I would like to. I'm good with taking it to DRAB and then bringing it to study after that.
Okay, to that advisory board.
Yeah.
Okay. Councilmember Lawson and Councilmember Sundberg, are you good with it going to the advisory board?
Yes, I'm good with that. Sorry.
Yes, and the Home Builders Association might want to be included too, knowing what has worked with other municipalities and what has not worked.
Yeah, I think they should definitely. In fact, I mean, they probably should have been involved earlier on.
Janine, did you say they're part of the task force?
Joint Task Force that meets on the 27th, correct?
Yeah, they're not part of the advisory board. They're part of the Joint Task Force. So we've got two different.
And we'll take it to both of them.
Okay. Okay, very good. All right, then that's the direction we'll take.
All right.
And then just to be clear, after those two, would it go to study session or come back to PED?
I'd prefer to take it to study.
I mean, that's fine with me. Councilmember Lawson, Sundberg.
I mean, yeah, after that, I mean, I would suggest it probably go to study. I mean, it's been here multiple times, so let it go to study.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would that be May 1st then? First study session?
Probably.
Okay. I'm going to assume May 1st, unless we say otherwise. I don't want to take up more of the time. Thanks. Thanks, Councilmember Bergan.
Thank you both.
All right. Appreciate y'all. Take care.
Next item, I lost my place here, is the opportunity zones. Andrea?
Morning, council members. Andrea Amanek, Development Services Manager. We have here Yuri Gorlov, Vice President of the Aurora Economic Development Council, who's going to give you an update on this tax program.
Thanks, Andrea. Good morning. First, in the room, I really took advantage of the hybrid approach. Got here, I was listening earlier and got here a little late. Yeah, so I'll run through quickly, short on time, but I had to take notes because of we've done quite a bit of work over the last 4 years on this since it was put into place with federal tax reform bill in 2017. So we first advocated for the best census tracts to be included because at the time A lot of tracks that were just more residential and developed were being included by the state. They were looking at this. So we worked closely with the governor's office on that. And then we co-hosted a forum with the State Office of Economic Development and International Trade. We partnered with the city of Aurora to create a GIS website. That was our approach versus building a prospectus or anything else that other communities did at the time. We met with a lot of investors and developers, businesses to get input and feedback of what this all really meant. We met with the policy architects out in DC. So there was a group that worked with the senators that got this included in the tax reform bill. So we actually met with them, with the director of relief agency at the time, Stephanie Copeland, to really talk through how Colorado could leverage things better than other states. Then we were invited to Aurora Economic Development was invited to join the Adams County Task Force that really tried to take a comprehensive look at what businesses and investors and housing authorities and attorneys and the municipalities in Adams County were doing and what they weren't doing. And then former Mayor Laguerre was invited to the White House when the Revitalization Council was announced. And that group was trying to combine or convene, I should say, about 20 different federal departments to really try to encourage investors to kind of take advantage of this a little more. I think initially the program was set to attract, I'm going to say, less than $100 billion worth of investment, and I think it's exceeded that. So in those terms, it's been more successful than the Congressional Budget Office predicted, and it's only 4 years in. So there were some timelines up front in 2019 and 2021 that allowed capital gains to reduce their basis, and those have since passed. But the real benefit of this program is capital gains that are put onto any project before the end of 2026 is all the appreciation on that asset once it's sold, if it's held for more than 10 years, is zero. So right, it's a really long-term equity box for a lot of folks, and that's why there's been a lot of news out there that, you know, the effectiveness of this program might not be what it was because it wasn't really meant to be infused into businesses. It was more of a real estate play, and all of that needs that I talked about at the previous DD meetings. So anyway, that's just a little background, and I know 2 of the 3 committee members are probably well aware of all that. Some activity that Aurora's received. So, and just a few stats before I get into that. There was an article in the Journal about Colorado actually being one of the best states to take advantage of the Opportunity Zone program, and not just in the metro urban areas, but in the rural parts of the state. And we've tracked, and again, tracking is a bit difficult for this program. Believe it to the federal government not being able to track some things, but we think that, or there are sources that think there's been about $1 billion invested in Colorado through Opportunity Zone funds. Of that, Aurora got about 10% of that is kind of the best guess and estimate and tracking that we have through a couple of different sources. So being, you know, having 5 census tracts out of 126, having 7% of the population of the state, I think having 10% of the Opportunity Zone funding makes us seem like we've punched a little bit above our weight and did a pretty good job of getting the attention to the program and our census tracts out there through the websites, through conversations, through meetings, through conferences, through all of that. So I will say the project list that I have in front of me isn't that large. And I know Andrea has worked with a few folks that we don't really work with in terms of housing development, but J Green Development, which I don't know, they might be on the phone, and they're part of the RAB, as it's called now. Good to know. They came in from Connecticut because of the Opportunity Zone. So that was a success. It was one of the earliest Opportunity Zone program projects that was reported in Colorado. So that was a great success for us. The other project that we were involved with was the Metro Center redevelopment or development, Greenfield, and those folks came in with opportunity. So those are the two projects that we really reeled in over the couple of last years. I'm sure there are more that we just don't touch, and I don't know if Andrea has any more insight on that. I checked with ODA, and they don't get that many inquiries for opportunity zone investments, projects, or anything like that, which isn't that surprising. And then the GIS website shows that there's been 6,000 visits to it since its inception 4 years ago, or just over 4 years ago, January of 2019. And then in the last 6 months, I think it's 500, and a little bit last year, 1,000 website visits or hits. So that's a decent chunk. That's a 2 or 3 a day that people go out there. So it's being used. I know that probably doesn't seem like a big number, but I think that's a pretty decent number. And so that's where we're all at. So on the horizon, the rumblings at the federal level have been that there might be some reform to the bill to extend some timelines, to change some regulations to it. Not sure if that passes with the administration that's in place today. But again, I just want to point out, I think, and leave this committee and city with, this program is just, halfway through, call it, right? There's still a couple of years for people to really figure out what projects they want to invest in, and, then work with planning and public works and the city departments to hit those timelines. I think there's a 35-month window where you have to, from inception of investing in the fund to getting a project, I guess, dirt moving, I'll say, a shovel in the ground, which is a fair amount of time, and I think is very reasonable. So I think we'll see some more projects that come our way. Our office hasn't been involved with that many in the last year, but that's not because it's not out there. It's because it's on other areas. So with that, I'll stop and see if there's any questions. Thanks for having me.
Councilmember Bergan, you're muted.
Do you guys have any questions or comments, Councilmember Lawson and Sundberg?
I do. Councilmember Bergan, can first of all, I just want to make a comment. Myself, Councilmember Bergan, we were on, when this first came up in opportunity zones and we would go on our advocacy trips, we definitely, this was a big issue and a big issue, not at the federal level, but a local and state as well. And I guess where I'm having an issue, and some people from the community and business owners who thought that opportunity zones were actually supposed to go into these distressed communities and really bring in where there's going to be kind of an equitable measure of where people can actually be invested into these communities. And these are the people that actually live in these communities. These are small business owners, people of minority and women-owned businesses. And what I'm seeing in the city of Aurora is more of the corporate that has been benefiting from opportunity zones. And it looks like, and I'm glad that I mentioned this at our advocacy trip, I asked both of our senators and most of the ones that we visited that opportunity zones needs to be revisited and cities need to be audited, because the purpose of which these were the intent for is not really what's happening. And a lot of people that I know are saying, what's going on with the city of Aurora with opportunity zones? We haven't even got an opportunity to maybe invest because we don't even have an opportunity to invest because we don't have the capital. And so I think the new interpretation of what opportunity zones are referred to now, I think that needs to be messaged out to people that are actually thinking that these were supposed to be intended for people to not only invest in these communities, not only the larger corporations and these people, investors that can do this, but also these smaller investors, these smaller businesses that can make impacts into the community and hire people in their community. So I wanted this to be brought forth because it hasn't been talked about for a long time. I know I get questions about it. Hey, what's going on with the city of Aurora about the opportunity zones? They're definitely not intended for me. And again, I really think that the federal government should push for an audit on cities, because I think the intent of these is not the way it is now. And I'm not just saying here in Aurora, but maybe in other jurisdictions as well. So I appreciate the, I guess the follow-up and telling us what Aurora's doing, but this has no bearing on what I think the intent, or other people should think the intent, and I guess the rules have changed a little bit over time, of what opportunity zones were actually supposed to do. And so that's what my disappointment is here with opportunity zones in the city of Aurora and in other jurisdictions as well. And again, I'm hoping that the federal government, and maybe with the push of the city, and it may not be the push of the city, but maybe a few voices can say, hey, this should actually be some reform on opportunity zones and how they're done right now, and actually having audits on cities and how this money and how this is being used and utilized. So I don't have any other questions, Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember Bergan, but it's just a comment on this, and I do appreciate the update. And I now see where some of my advocacy would be and on some things based on what we're doing in the city of Aurora and just in general on the topic of opportunity zone. So thank you, Yuri, and thank you, Andrea, for the presentation.
Councilmember Sundberg.
No comments or questions.
Yuri, is there any way to tell what businesses tried to apply or applied for the opportunity zone and didn't qualify? I know part of the problem was there wasn't going to be an investment for businesses that maybe would not be sustainable in the long run, like for 5 years. Is there any data that you know of?
Not that I know of, but happy to dig into that and talk to some people.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see, if you could see who applied and why it didn't work out. But thank you very much for the presentation. We'll move on to our last item before miscellaneous, and that's the resolution on the development review incentive. And I think we have Councilmember Gardner or Mayor Pro Tem Gardner here.
Good morning. Thank you, Councilmember Bergan, and the rest of the PED committee for the opportunity to present this morning. So what this is a resolution directing the city manager to develop an incentive program for development plan reviews. Want to talk first a little bit about kind of the reasoning behind it, and then from there talk a little bit about why it's structured how it is. So I don't think I'm unique in that, I have heard time and time again feedback from the development community about frustrations with our development review process. And, I don't think that's all fair necessarily to our staff. I can certainly acknowledge there are times when developers want something done yesterday and that timeline isn't realistic. But I will say I've heard some consistent feedback from folks that are not involved in the same projects, which leads me to believe there are some issues. One specific are plan reviews that are going to 6 and 7 plan reviews, and comments are popping up that should have been or were resolved earlier and are coming back up later for to be reviewed, and things like that. I think the other thing is the uncertainty of the time frame or the timeline. I've heard feedback from developers over frustration about the time that it takes for plans to be reviewed. And I don't want to speak for all developers, but I will say, most that I talk to are certainly okay with living within, reasonable regulation. Any business is okay living within reasonable regulation, but where it becomes challenging is uncertainty, right? Most of you probably are aware, developers expend hundreds of millions of dollars potentially before building ever happens. And, I know for myself, and I assume for most of my other colleagues, recognize that there's a need for more housing. And the longer that developers have to wait for those plans to be reviewed and they have that money outstanding, the more expensive those houses get. So I think there's some common themes that I've heard, like I said, from the development community that would make something like this helpful. Next, I want to talk a little bit about kind of why it's structured how it is. So it's structured as a resolution directing the city manager to develop this incentive program. And the reason why I wanted to do it that way is because I think our job as council is to create the policy and to say what the policy direction is, and then let the city staff develop it. I obviously have some ideas in terms of what this could look like or how it could be structured. Is the incentive financial? Is it something different? I don't know. Like I said, have those ideas, but realistically, that needs to come from staff. I think, for those of you who have been in the private sector, developing and creating incentive programs for the outcomes that we want. And for me, I want to see faster review times so we can get things built quicker, because we need that supply. I think is a way to address that. If you incentivize something you want to see, you're typically going to see that. So that's kind of a quick down and dirty description of what I'm trying to do here, and certainly would be open to questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions, Councilmember Sundberg or Lawson?
Just one quick comment that I know it's not always the fault of our department and employees, and sometimes the developers themselves can rush things and make mistakes, but the importance of getting things done and approved can also not only increase the cost of housing, but a developer can completely miss the market, having waited too long and lost a complete opportunity to market homes, or a home builder can back out. So just emphasizing the importance of completing what needs to be done.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We don't know what the market's going to do. Nobody has a crystal ball. So, when interest rates go up as they have recently, I know, if housing could have been put on the market sooner, that might have helped some of our development partners as well. So I think it's a good resolution. I'm in support of it. I think incentives are important and are effective in trying to, get the right outcome. So happy to see this, and I guess Mayor Pro Tem, we're waiting for staff then to come up with the exact incentive program?
Yeah, like I said, I have my ideas, obviously, but realistically, I think, management staff, city manager and planning director and deputies and things like that need to really develop what they think is going to work within our processes. My expectation would be that staff would come back as an information item and present what they developed. But, in our structure of government, I think the staff, we need to make clear what we want to see, and what I want to see, at least, and that's why I, came up with this. What I want to see is our development plans and reviewed sooner and quicker and with more certainty. And so, what I would expect is management staff to come back and present either at PED or at a study session to all of council and say, hey, this is what we came up with. And then from there, it's our job to track the metrics and ensure that what they came up with has the desired outcomes. So that's what my expectation is that staff would come back and present either, like I said, to PD or to city council at a study session as an information item onto what they developed. But I did not want to put a timeline in here. I'll certainly hold staff accountable and I'll be in their ear about it, but I didn't want to say it needs to be done within 90 days or whatever. I think we need to do it right. And I think that's just as important as doing something. We need to do something right. And so, yeah, that would be what I would expect.
Yeah, I know we had talked in the past about when we did the red tape ad hoc committee about, like a 3 strikes and the review gets to just go through. And obviously I think you probably agree that was not necessarily the best way to do it. So yeah, so I think this is a good idea. Any other comments?
Yeah, I agree. I think something like that is fraught with unintended consequences. And so that's why I kind of wanted to do similar to what you see in the private sector, where you incentivize, the activity that you want to see.
Okay, great. All right. And so we can go ahead and move this forward. Councilmember Lawson and Sundberg.
Yes.
Okay, very good.
Me as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. So that will move forward to study session.
Thank you for your time.
We'll go ahead. Yeah, thank you. We'll move ahead with the miscellaneous matters. What reports do we have? I saw in the chat that Becky Hogan from planning just mentioned that they have the Aurora Mental Health Campus and for planning, I guess tonight. I think it's tonight. And then also the ADU in Ward 1. Any other reports that need to happen?
Yes, council member. This is Andrea Amanek from Development Services. We have a small business report and an update on the city's small business ARPA program by Elena Vasconez.
Okay, very good. Go ahead, Elena.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Good morning, council members. And thank you for the opportunity to share a couple updates on small business as well as the SBDC. As Andrea said, my name is Elena Vasconez, and I'm the Small Business and Economic Development Supervisor for the Planning and Development Department. As you might remember, on January 31st, 2021, City Council passed a resolution creating the Small Business Grant Program with $2.5 million of ARPA funds. The program launched on June 27th and closed July 15th. We have been reviewing applications and dispersing the grants for the past few months. The program will close by the end of April. The amounts of grants were $5,000 for post-pandemic startups and $10,000 for existing businesses. 320 applications were screened. 274 businesses met the qualifications. In order to qualify, the business had to be compliant with licensing and taxes, and their net revenues had to be under $350,000 or their gross revenues less than $5 million. We have approved 260 grants for existing businesses and 14 grants for post-pandemic startups for a total amount of $2,560,000. A third of the way in the approval process, we thought we might not have enough money due to the number of applications. So we requested from council another $600,000, which was approved. Given that we did not use the entire amount, we have returned $500,000. From the 274 businesses that were approved, 48.8% were women-owned businesses, 30% Caucasian, 25% Black or African American, 24% Asian, 16% Hispanic, and 3.8% in the other category. I am very happy to report that businesses located across all wards have received grants. On the SBDC front, we launched a pilot program to help childcare cooperatives in partner with Center for Community Wealth Building and the financial support of the Office of Early Childhood. We developed a 9-week class in Spanish to guide home-based childcare providers on how to form worker-owned cooperatives. Given that the class was done online and businesses from across the state attended the class, 3 cooperatives will be formed based on their geographical location: Aurora, Denver, Fort Collins, and Durango. Currently, with the help of Community Wealth Building, we're providing consulting sessions to help them launch their cooperatives. And finally, we are also supporting the formation of a worker-owned composting service cooperative. And we'll be bringing more updates on these cooperatives. Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Elena. Good work. Any comments or questions? No. Thank you. Appreciate the report. And then any other reports? I think I saw something in the chat from Chance on Havana. And then the oil and gas, I guess, is in our backup. So anything else that anybody wants to speak up before we go ahead and close the meeting? Okay. So just because I didn't know today was possibly hybrid in person, are we in May, we're completely virtual, or are we hybrid?
Virtual, we had talked about quarterly doing this hybrid, so I'll give you a call and we'll get our next date for the hybrid.
Okay, so when we do the next hybrid, can we send out and just like in big bold,
We will,
you know, meet
at the top of the
hybrid,
agenda.
hybrid is confusing. If we can say in person or hybrid
We can do that.
or virtual, whatever. Yeah, that'd be great. Okay. I thank everyone for being here and have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Ready?
Bye.
Thank you so much.
All right, somebody escorts two visitors out. Go.